Hello, how's it going? Today, I wanted to talk about the differences between British mentality and American mentality. And I guess I'll be drawing from this a little bit in the time to come, mostly because the experience of living in Britain for a couple of years is still fresh in my mouth, and then coming back to America, it's kind of bit jarring, to say the least. Not that I should be surprised, but you kind of get used to a certain way of life, and then suddenly it changes. One thing that I would say, at least in this video, I'll kind of stick to one topic, is that the British um, tend to have this. They're known for being very polite, um, incredibly polite in public situations that could get very tense. For example, jumping in the queue, cutting in line, or walking. Occasionally you walk into somebody on the street. You kind of move and you don't really coordinate which way you're going to go. Um, and they tend to be very polite in those situations. And it's very superficial. I think it works, but to say that as a point of pride for their national identity is a little bit strange as far as I'm concerned. Because, well, I would say that a lot of it's almost a sense of vanity, that you're constantly worried that neighbors might think that you're an asshole, or um, you like to see yourself as polite, and you like to see, it's almost like an image that you're concerned about, rather than politeness is the way that a functioning society runs. Um, I do like politeness, don't get me wrong, but at some point you need to drop the politeness. Um, and particularly, like when everybody's polite, somebody who's rude, it's very jarring, and it's very offensive to the average Englishman, English woman, Brit in general. Um, when it comes to, for example, like one of the things that I've noticed coming back here is people honk their horns a lot. This is not obviously what's going on in Canada. This is just people uh, just honking their horns for the hell of it. I don't know. You slow down too much and they honk their horn. You drive too fast. People in the oncoming traffic, they honk their horn. It's very honk heavy here, and it's in Britain. I don't think it's illegal to honk, but it's extremely rude. It's very rare that you would hear somebody honk. Perhaps if somebody's life or safety is in danger, then you might honk. Uh, but on the other hand, there's a flip side to this coin, is that while politeness is almost like a buffer, you are essentially you are polite, but you are distant. And I found that a lot of English people are very distant. You'd have to know them pretty well. And there's a genuine trait to that, like authenticity, in the sense of you're just not going to be friends with anybody. But it's also, as an outsider, it's very cold and distant. Now, even here in Philadelphia, we're known for being rude and arrogant and assholes in general. We're also very friendly. And I mean this for as far as like anonymous interaction is concerned. Like, you go into a supermarket and you see that the line is really long and it's not moving, you might end up chatting to your neighbor. This is almost unthinkable in England. I have had some experience in the north, in Yorkshire, and people tend to be a lot more friendly. This might be a big city, little city thing. But if you go into places like Canada, small towns, Canada, small town Pennsylvania, small town West Virginia, places that I've known and spent a lot of time in, uh, they'll chat your ear off. It really is, it's too friendly. You just think, okay. And then the more the people start talking, the more they start getting like disclosing personal information, like medical background, or like their medical history. It's like, I don't need to know about your toe fungus. Like you just keep that one to yourself. Save yourself the embarrassment. Save me the pain of having to hear about it and think about it. But I find that Americans are much friendlier. And Canadians are a nice balance. They're friendly and they're polite. And I think that obviously as an American, I would probably side with my own country because it's the environment I'm familiar with. I find myself to be very. It's also my personality trait that I'm not a very outgoing person. But if someone talks to me, I will talk back to them. I usually don't initiate conversation with strangers just because I don't know. I'm usually lost in my own thoughts, or I have a consideration for the possibility this person really doesn't want to talk to anybody. Perhaps that's having lived in England. Germany is very much the same way, where strangers do not talk to one another unless it's sort of an odd circumstance. Um, and it kind of makes me think about the idea of the difference between being friendly and polite. That friendly, uh, British people might think about Americans as being friendly, but it's sort of a false friendliness. It's very just superficial. And, you know, you meet somebody and then suddenly you're best friends. That kind of cheapens the idea of being friends, that friendship and respect and admiration is something to be earned, not just sort of thrown away like garbage on the street here in Philadelphia. Um, and but I do think that there's something nice about being open to strangers. That anytime you go out in the street, you could meet your new best friend, or you might have an interesting conversation with a stranger. Um, the thing is that like I say that the British have this perception, or like this perception as Americans as being phony. Um, there might be a ring of truth to that, but how do you make friends? I found it very difficult to make friends with people outside of work because if you haven't been friends with these people since you were in 6 years old and infants, or as they call it, uh, you don't have a chance of making friends unless you work with the person. But it's really a strange circumstance where you just can't make new friends. And uh, I understand being reluctant to make friends because it seems phony. But the whole, like, a lot of people just don't talk to me, um, which I found to be interesting because a lot of people, when I worked at a supermarket in Britain, they would tell me the strangest thing. It's like if we were just standing there at a bus stop or a tube station, we wouldn't be talking to one another. But because I'm sitting behind this till here, you're going to tell me who you're going to vote for in the next election, what we ought to do with the coronavirus measures and things like that. Just very personal things. On the other hand, I find that I'm fine with that. It's very contradictory to the typical mentality. It's mainly because it's almost like embarrassing because we have to sit here and we have this sort of slightly more personal interaction because we are doing a business transaction here. It works in a very similar way, maybe a truncated version of going to the barber shop and talking with the barber, because I'm going to be sitting in this chair for the next 15 to 20 minutes. It's even more awkward not to say anything to one another. On the other hand, if you have, like, they use razors, electric razors around your ear, I can't hear anything you say. So, you know, um, it's a very bizarre situation when you're working in a supermarket, because some people will just go through and you just kind of forget about them. Some people are very nasty. Some people are very pleasant. I did meet interesting people, people who have had experience with America. Usually they wouldn't talk about negative experience, but whether they would give me tips, go try this restaurant down there, or very, it's almost like you have to have some kind of business or like some kind of business or government involvement in the nature of the relationship for anything to happen between two people who don't know each other. So in a business situation where you talk to somebody behind the till, or somebody at the working on the shop floor, as well as someone, if you had worked at or if you were in school together, then you can become friends, or if you grew up together. I think it's really kind of painful to try to make friends as a foreigner in the country, and it's very, I would say, off-putting. Likewise, I do find that a lot of Americans can be phony, and the French would call it faux cul, very false ass, very just, you come off friendly, but really it's just pleasantries. It's our own form of politeness. But to be fair, like I just feel like I have to defend my country and my culture. But to be fair, I find it's a lot easier. The day's a lot easier because you're not actively trying to avoid people. That you walk down and hey, even this guy walked up to me. I can't tell it here. He walked up to me and told me a dirty joke and then walked off. This old 70-year-old man on the corner of the street, probably about 3 or 4 blocks from here. Okay. I kind of like that stuff. People just walk up to you and they start talking to you about stuff. You might not even care about what it is, but it's just kind of, it just makes the day a little bit more interesting than being just very blinkered. So I'd like to think that if anything I took away from this experience of living in England, at least personality wise, is that just try to strike a balance between being very polite. I'm very polite until I'm not, and I'll explain that. So I'm very polite in a very British way. I think I've always been that way, especially with foreign, or not foreign, but like strangers. The Just be as polite as possible. One, because if you're working at anywhere and you have like interaction with the public, like so you have customers, they come and go. Usually that's a retail job. You never know when it's going to bite you in the ass if you're rude. You never know. You never know if it's going to pay dividends if you're extremely polite. You go out of your way. Hey, I got $1 raise just because I helped some dude, and the guy just called my boss up later that day and gave me a really, compliment. And he's like, he went out of his way. He was climbing in the back, just trying to find something for me, and he dug something up, and he just really went out. I got $1 raise out of that. And I know that's not a ton of money, but hey, it's better than a kick in the teeth. But I try to strike that politeness because you never know if it's going to pay off in a good way or if it's going to bite you in the ass in a negative way. On the other hand, don't be phony. Be extremely authentic. So don't try to become friends with somebody unless you really want to become friends with them. And unfortunately, that requires repeated interaction with people. And when you're walking out on the street, just walking as just a regular person out there in the world, you don't tend to run into the same people over and over and over again because, I live in a big city. I think there's about 1.5 million people in it. It's far too many people in one place, but that's where we live right now. And there tends to be a lot of interaction that's very anonymous. And in that case, it's hard to get repeated interaction. So you might have a pleasant chat, but you'll never see this person again. The chances are just minuscule, even if you stick to your area. And particularly in this coronavirus era, I know that a lot of places are sort of letting up on the restrictions, mostly because they're getting hammered in the polls. This is very unpopular to continue with this lockdown or masks or even forcing people to get injections. I'm not going to get into whether that's a good thing or a bad thing. But it does tend to, the social lubricant is totally gone in society now. That all this stuff, everybody looks at each other as if they're a potential threat. You might kill me, that kind of thing. I've had coronavirus. It sucked. I don't know who to pin it on. And even if I did, I I have a slight idea. I didn't even begrudge that person because it happens. People get sick. I never understood, maybe a few years ago. So I knew who I caught the flu off of, and I never really grudged anybody that. If you sneeze in my face, like unintentionally, I might be upset, but I don't get really bent out of shape about that. But like I say, like you strike a balance, be very polite because it could come back to bite you in the ass. You might look like an asshole. You might look like just an absolute legend at your job. On the other hand, be open to friendships or at least positive interaction with customers or your neighbors or your bus driver, whatever. The person working at the library who is extremely chatty. Then again, I think if you're an extremely chatty person, maybe the library is not the right place for you. Um, but I would say that the balance is pretty good. So anyway, before I start rambling any further, I'll just wrap it up there. I'll talk to you soon.